Hi friends, welcome back to SQL with Ravimartha. So this is SQL Server tutorial series for beginners. So if you are currently in database testing or a manual testing, right? And if you want to learn SQL, you can follow this particular SQL Server tutorial series. So in this, I'm preparing a complete playlist for SQL beginners. So if you want to build your career towards ETL testing or database testing, or if you want to learn SQL, right, you can follow this series. And before proceeding, if you are not subscribed to my channel, please do subscribe and please press the bell icon. So let's get started. So this is part 7 of this series. So in this so this is part 7 of this series. So today we'll see what is a table and how to create a table, how to insert data into the table, and how to retrieve the data in and how to retrieve the data from that particular table. And the keywords to create the table are create, and inserting data can be done using the insert, and retrieving the data, that is getting the data from the table, can be done using the select statement. So let's go ahead and create a table, insert some data and select the data, right? So let's get started. So create table. So before proceeding further, just we'll give some overview of what is SQL. So for this we'll take an example. So you might have booked some flight ticket or a train ticket, etc., right? So for that you might have went to an application, front end application, where you can go to their respective site and you book the ticket, and you provide all your details, and you will give all your details and you will book a ticket. When you book the ticket, right, the the ticket will be created. The When you book the ticket, right, so the ticket will be, and it will provide you all the ticket details, right, and whatever the data you have provided, right, that will be stored into a database. So when you access any site, right, so once you submit the form, all the data will be going to the backend database. So the application which you are seeing on the screen, right, or the laptop screen or the computer screen, that is nothing but a front-end application. For every front-end application there is a backend database. So this is front-end application and this is the backend database, and the database is shown, and a database can be represented as a cylindrical shape like this, right? So the SQL, so all the data will be stored in the database, and the database, from the database, if you want to retrieve the data, right, you should use a language called SQL. So if you have seen my previous video, I have started with creating a database and storing the data, creating a database, and what are the constraints in SQL. So I have started with what are the data types available. So everything I have started explaining now. So this is the overall. So this is the overview, like, for any application the data will be stored in the backend database, and that will be stored in a table, and from the table we will retrieve the data, right? So the data in the database will be stored in a table. So we will also see what is a table, but the database definition also I have given in my previous video. You can please go ahead and check that video as well. And the table is a two-dimensional object. So the table will have a columns and rows, and columns are also called as attributes and rows are called as tuples, right? So usually we'll call it as rows and columns, but in SQL we call it as attributes or tuples, right? For columns attributes and rows tuples. So this is how, so this is the overview of the database, right? Let's go ahead and see the agenda for today's session. So agenda is to create a table and insert data and select the data from a table, right? So before creating actual table, some we'll also see some details about the table. So as you see here, this is a you might have already worked on with Excel, right? So as you see, so the table is a two-dimensional object. Suppose if you see here, so we can consider this as a table. So which is having column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4 and column 5. So there are 5 columns and there are different number of rows. So a SQL table can have a fixed number of columns, and rows it can have n number of rows. So it depends on the database size. So if you have more memory in the database, you can store n number of rows in the database. So you can store as many rows as you want, right? This is how the uh, SQL table works, right? So this is column, which is also called as attributes, and these are called rows. So the vertical columns and the rows are horizontal entries, right? And rows are also called as tuples. So this is how this is a two-dimensional object. So this is basically an x-axis and this is a y-axis. So a table is a two-dimensional object. That's how we can understand it. And the data will be stored in this table. So here, let's create one more sheet and we will try to add data to this. So this is the table. So let's add some data. We can say table, a column will have specified data. A column will have certain kind of data. Suppose if it is, we can say employee ID, employee name, employee salary, date of joining, and location, right? So these are the columns basically, right? And we can have entries to that particular table. I can say employee ID 1 and employee name is Smith, salary is 50,000 and date of joining is 2020 0103. So this is the date format and location is India. Similarly, we can have one more entry which is George, which is salary 45,000, and I can have different date here 04 and 02, and country you can say US. Similarly, this is how the rows will be there. So if you observe, each column is having specific data type. Example, so employee ID is nothing but a numerical value like a number, right? 1 2 3 4 5 6 etc. And the name is a text column. Salary is an integer column, or it may have a decimal column, but it's a numeric column, right? And here it is a date column, and location is a text column. So in table, each column will have specific, which is holding a specific type of data. So employee ID is just an integer column, and salary is an integer column, and date of joining is a date column, which is storing a date data type or a date kind of data only, right? If you try to insert different data, it will throw an error. So we'll also see in demo, but this is how a table looks like, as simple as that, right? Let's go ahead and run it. Let's go ahead and create a table in database, right? Now in the previous session we have created a database. So in the previous session we have created a database, right? So create database and database name. This is the general syntax of creating a database, right? So we have created SQL underscore demo. Let's create this one again. So the command completed successfully. So to see the database, right, the backend database, so I'm using SQL Server. This is the client tool to connect to the SQL Server. So I have created SQL underscore demo. It is not showing up here. So what we need to do is like right click on the databases and click on the refresh button, right? So this would show the any newly created database. So SQL underscore demo is the database which we have created, right? Now, once you create a database, there are certain folders which are defaultly created. By default, when you create a database, these are the folders which are created by default. So, which are database diagrams, tables, views, external resources, synonyms, programmability, security. So, down the line, I'll create videos on these as well. But for now, we can understand that when you create a database in Microsoft SQL Server, so you will be you know these are the folders which are getting created by default. However, if you are using the Oracle, MySQL, etc., so you will have different set of folders created, but more or less the commands which will use, right, which will be more or less the same. 90% of it will be same because they follow ANSI standard. If you see my previous video, I have explained what is ANSI standard, right? Right. So now let's go ahead and create a table. So we have created a database in the above section. Now it's time to create a table. Let's create a table. Creation of a table in SQL. So to communicate with the database, we use SQL as the language, right? So let's start with the syntax of the table. First thing, the create is the DML, sorry. So create is the DDL command. So data definition. So we are creating the definition of a table here. So create table. So let's start creating table. Create table and the table name. So let's say table name, and we will give the column name column 1 and column data type, and we'll give the nullability. Similarly, we'll give for this other columns as well. So we may have a number of columns, right? So let's click on Alt button and give commas. So these are the table columns. So we have column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4, column 5. I'm just giving the syntax. So this is how the table can be created. If it is a primary key, we can say primary key. We can write as a primary key, right? So this is the general syntax of a table. Now we will create a employee table. So creating tbl employee table. So to switch to the database, either you can use create the we can use the use keyword SQL underscore demo. You can run it, or you can also select it from the drop down menu if you are using the SQL server, right? So you can also use the statement, click on execute. So we have switched to SQL demo, right? Let's create a table now. So create table table employee. So first I want to create the I have a so we will add a first we'll add a column that is employee ID, which is a int data type. So it's just a number, and I don't want it to be a null value entering into that column. So it should be always the value should be provided in the table. So if you see the constraint in SQL video, right, I have explained about null, not null constraint, right? Null constraint, sorry, not null constraint, right? So in this table or in this column, we should not enter any null values. Even if you are trying to enter null values, it will throw an error, right? Next column is employee name. We can see Varchar. If you see the data type video, will understand what is int and Varchar text data type, right? These may slightly vary in other databases, but you can just Google it and get it when you are working with other databases. So I want to give the length of the text column to be 20 characters. I'll say emp underscore location. This is also text character, text data type. So I'm using the data type, and date of joining, I want to say it as date, and I'll say salary, which is the int column, right? So I have created, so this is a table, syntax for the table creation. And if you want to use primary key, we can also use it, but this is a basic simple table. Let's start with this. So we'll also add primary key, foreign key later on. So this is how we create any table. For that, you know, if you're not mentioning any nullability, right, by default it takes the null as the default. Null is the default nullability it takes. If you want a column to be not null, you should explicitly mention, else it will be by default it will be null. So let me add it null, and rest all I'm not adding. Let's see what happens, what is nullability of this column, right? Let's create the table. So for creating that, what you need to do is, like, if you are using SQL or any other database, just select that particular block of code and then click on execute. So it says the command successfully completed. Now you can go to the tables folder and you can see the TBL employee which is created now, right? And when you expand that, it will have other folders called columns, keys, constraints, triggers, indexes, etc. So let's expand the columns, which is says employee ID, which is not null, and employee name, we have mentioned it as nullable column, so it has taken null. For employee location, we haven't mentioned anything, right? But still it is taken null. So by default, it takes null as the nullability value, right? So this is how the table creation can be done. And this is a two-dimensional object. Now we have created a table. Let's go ahead and go ahead and insert the data to this particular table. Inserting data into the table, right? So create is a DDL command, insert is a DML command, which means we are trying to manipulate the table. So we are trying to insert the data, so that is also a manipulation of the data. So for this table, let's add the syntax first. So the syntax for inserting the data to the table is insert into the table name. So we can say table name and column list and values and the values list. That means the column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4, right? So similarly for the column list also we can mention the same thing, that is column list nothing but this is the same thing. So here this is how we insert the data. So here we have to mention the column name. So let's pick up the column names from here. For that you can click on Alt F1 or the Alt F1, which is a shortcut to get the table details. So here I have got the details, column details, by pressing Alt F1. So I can select that and I'm giving the column list here. So this is the employee ID, employee name, location. Now, so the table name is table employee, which we have created just above, and this is the column list, and these are the column values. So for the column values, let's enter the values. So employee ID, if you are entering just a number, we don't need to put it in quotes, single quotes, right? But if you are entering the employee name, so this is just number, so I have just entered employee ID is a number, I entered it directly. For employee name, for example, if I am adding Smith, right? If the employee name is Smith, we should enclose it with the single quotes. So this is single quote, starting with single quote and end with single quotes. So this is one point to be noted when you are working with the databases, right? At least the Microsoft SQL Server, we should put it in quotes. You can also check out for the other databases. And the employee location, right, which is, you can say India, and this also text column, we should be enclosed with the single quotes. And the date also should be enclosed with the within the single quotes. So 2020 0102, which is year, month, and the date, right? Salary also, here it is a number, so I just need to give it directly without using any single quotes. So this is inserting one row. So let's go ahead and insert the data to that particular table. So it says one row got affected, right? So now how to see this particular data which got inserted just now? Let's say selecting the data into the table, data from the table, right? So for that we just need to, let's see the syntax first. The general syntax is select star from the table name. So this is how we can select the data. So let's query the table which we have created above. Click here. So this is the table name which which we have inserted the data above. So let's fire this query by selecting the particular command. So here the data which we have inserted above got inserted into this particular table, and we are able to retrieve the data, or we can pull the data from the database using the select star from the table name, right, which is TVL employee, and we got the one row, right? Let's uh, let's add couple more rows in this. So here the second row I'm entering employee ID2. If I say Smith, if we can say some other names also, just George and Mark, right? And we can see US, and the joining date is 2019. We can add, which is April 28. We can say 50. So this is the second record addition. See, there are a couple of other ways which we can insert the data. So this is second row also we are able to retrieve by using the select query. And there is one more way which we can add the rows as sets. So basically in this case I have used this one, and we can also add the rows by repeating the column list here in the values, right? So here I'm using the 3, so I say employee 3 and UK 2018 25 Similarly, here we can write for emp4. I'm just giving rough data. We can say UK, which is 2016. Some data we can give, just add some random data for just. So let's insert this particular record. So we have till now we have inserted 2 records. Now this is the 2 more records we are getting inserted, right? So the 2 rows got inserted. Overall we have 4 rows. Let's select that and execute. So we have 4 rows here. That's how we can insert the data. And there is one more thing. If you want to add inserting data to specific columns. So as you see here, so we have only employee ID which is not column, rest all can be nullable, right? So if I just want to give couple of columns, data to couple of columns, we can still do that. So let's check it out. So the employee ID is not null column, so we must provide the data to the employee ID, right? So here we can say we don't want to give the salary and employee location. So we just want to give the 3 rows. So here the employee ID is 5, we can give, and employee name is 5, and date of joining we can give as 2011 and 26. So this is the overall we have 5 columns in this table, but we can also give data to specific columns if they are nullable columns, right? So in this case I am giving the 3 columns alone. 1, so we have salary extra, so salary also should be removed. So we should give in the same sequence, right? If we are the first is employee ID, so we should give the value for employee ID, right? So execute this. So you can see 1 row affected. Let's execute this again. So this is how now we can see the employee location and salary is, since they are nullable columns, the value is no value is there, it will be defined as just null, right? Null is not equal to 0, null is not equal to anything. So null is which is value which is not provided. So at that time we will just mark it as null, right? Let's also try inserting a couple of other data. Suppose for number column, if you are giving a text, we'll see what happens, right? emp5 some text data, and let's see what it says. So when you run this query, right, the conversion failed when converting the var, it says, so the conversion failed when converting the varchar value employee 5 to data type integer. So that's why when we learned the data type, right, so each data type can store specific type of data. So if it is a int column, it can store numbers only. So when you try to input text, right, it says the conversion failure because it cannot store that kind of data in that particular column. So the data type is important, so it will not allow any other data if it is int. And also let's see if it is some date also, we'll try adding some of the data which is employee 3. So here I have changed back to number, so we don't need, since it's a number, we don't need to keep it under double quotes or single quotes, sorry. So let's execute this and see. Yeah, you can say conversion failed when converting the date or time from the character string, right? So the conversion fails because it can store only dates, not other data, not the numbers, not the text. Only the dates will be allowed to enter in this particular column. So we should make sure that we are entering the right data type, right data in right column. right? That's why we are specifically defining what kind of data we want to store. In this case, we want to store only integer number. And in text column, even if you give number, date, or anything, it will take as simple text, right? In date column, it will only allow dates. In the integer column, it will allow only numbers. So this is how the data can be retrieved from the database. And select star from. Star means it's all columns. And what if you want to select only three columns, right? Employee ID, employee location, and salary. Let's see how to write that. So we should, when you write any SQL query, right, start writing. So let's start writing how to write the select query. Select star from TBL employee. When you say the IntelliSense, when you enable in the IntelliSense, it will automatically populate what are the tables available in the database when you start typing the sequence, right? So if it say TBL, then it will give all the tables which are starting with TBL. So in this case, TBL employee. So I'm selecting the data. So execute the query. So this is the query. Now let's select only couple of columns: employee ID, comma, and employee location, salary. So when you write the table name, right, it will first write the select star from and the table name. And when you start typing the column name, it will automatically detect that what are the columns available in that particular table. So if I type DOJ, or so it pops up from the table. So it's important to give the first table name so that it can detect all the columns which you are trying to write. So instead of star, which means we want to select only couple of columns, right? Only, then let's run this. So here we have selected only three columns. In the first case, we have selected all the columns. Let's run both together and see how the data makes a difference, right? So here we have 5 columns and here we have 3 columns. So this is how the creation of table and inserting data and selection of data happens in SQL to a table, right? So in the next session, we'll see how to update a table, how to delete data from the table. So in the meantime, you can start installing the SQL Server and do drop an email if you need any assistance, so that we can install the SQL Server to practice your SQL, right? And feel free to drop an email, and happy to assist you in case of any installation issues, right? And thank you for watching my video, and thanks for your time. Have a great day.